The idea seems unreal, yet in a speech to cutting-edge electronic identification insiders and immigration officials from all over the world, Jerry Webster, a spokesman for the United States INS Department, spoke of how countries are now sharing information on those deemed to have dangerous beliefs.
But identifying marks, especially some kind of tattoos that identifies somebody with being maybe a member of a particular cult or a particular subversive group that's international. We're certainly talking of sharing at least those images.
How could so-called subversive groups be tracked? It may come as a surprise, but the technology is already in operation.
If you go through Terminal 3 at Toronto International Airport, the United States Department of Immigration has a biometric scanner which you can use if you sign up for the program. It's called INSPAS. And in order to sign up for this program, you give the U.S. Department of Immigration a handprint, and you pass through this system, put your hand on a reader which reads your handprint after having read the information that's encoded on your card. You punch in your flight number on a little terminal, and the gate goes open and you walk through without having to talk to a customs or an immigration officer.
I certainly feel that someday we will all be identified by our biometric, both for use in an ATM machine. We will walk up and put our finger pattern or hand geometry or our eye scan in front of that machine, and we'll be accepted right into the system and welcomed, and we'll be able to transact our business. I believe biometric will be used in every part of our life someday. I believe it will be used to unlock the door to your house, to start your car, to transmit transactions or get on your computer. Everything you do will require that you prove who you are.
The principle of being able to identify people is a reasonable one. And in many cases, we want to be able to identify people. We want to make sure that you're using your credit card. We want to make sure that your health data is being associated with your previous medical record. So that the principle of identifying people is perfectly reasonable. The question is, as with everything else, how are we going to place limits on this so that it's not used in other ways that we don't think are appropriate?
Technology is always born two faces, and it is the timeless problem of society to ensure that technology serves humanity and not have humanity serving technology. The latter equation is the Orwellian life. We're getting closer to it all the time. We've got to stop.
We see a tremendous pressure to develop technical solutions to certain kinds of problems, whether it is policing or marketing or revenue checking through Revenue Canada. So the pressure in both directions comes in a way that encourages technical means of identifying, classifying people, that is to say grading people according to certain criteria, and sorting them within these classification systems and trying to predict their behaviors.
Initially, I guess, police, security services, and so on that protect our countries would use these mechanisms to trace down criminals and those who are perhaps taking terrorist-type activity and so on. However, who's to stop that from bleeding over to the average citizen and taking advantage of what we classify our own privacy? It's all too easy to bleed over.
For example, you have the situation of policing. Increasingly, policing is done in a preemptive way, trying to work out who is likely to break the law, who is going to infringe some rule. And that preemptive, so-called techno-policing is on the rise. It's a good solution from the point of view of cost-benefit analysis. But what does it do? What does it do? It means that time-honored features of our own legal system, which has a good ethical base that you are innocent until you're proved guilty, is just turned on its head. If you're in a category of suspects, just because you happen to, your profile happens to fit the statistical likelihood of your being in that category, you are guilty until proved innocent.
You see, so often what happens, these things become something like the Sorcerer's Apprentice. We create the instrument. There's a legitimate reason for it, but the instrument goes on and becomes a monster in its own right.
I caused them trouble. I was defending people and getting them acquitted who they wanted in prison. They didn't like that, so they started to look at me, try and find out about my personal background, who my father was, what our family was, where my money came from, whether I had a single or had girlfriends, that kind of thing. Personal information that they had absolutely no business gathering.
There are very big forces out there that, while they don't coerce us, certainly are trying to manipulate our choices, channel our desires, make us live in a particular kind of way, and it may not be the way that we would choose to live if the various kinds of alternatives were explained to us.
Today, as we move into this brave new world, which has that same syncretistic, pluralistic religious view of the ancient Romans, Christianity seems more and more out of step. Those who hate Christianity find they're able now in this brave new world that we're entering to attack Christianity, claiming that somehow our beliefs make us intolerant. Jesus said in John 15:25, they hated thee without a cause. But during the tribulation hour under the new world order and the world dictator, it's going to get worse. Anyone who even honors this Christ is going to be killed, Revelation 13:15. Revelation 20, verse 4.
I bet when they come up with all this new technology, they didn't tell anybody to use for this.
They sure did. In fact, it sounded so good that even a lot of Christians thought it sounded great.
I remember a few years ago they came in, they took our fingerprints, scanned my face, all that technical stuff, but I thought it was just for prisoners.
I'm afraid not, John. It's for everybody now.
They're keeping track of everyone. They sure must have a big filing cabinet out there somewhere.
Times have changed, my friend. Times have changed.
There are enormous quantities of highly sensitive and intimate personal information about all of us now contained in data banks all over the place. Governments alone have literally billions of pieces of information. If they start matching up all this data and using it any way they like, our rights and our privacy are in serious jeopardy. That is now happening and needs to be looked at very carefully.
30 years ago, people were screaming and yelling about a national database, a national data bank, and that there were proposals to create a single computer filled with personal information on all people in this country. Well, now that's a ridiculous concept. You can have distributed networks, distributed systems. You can have millions and millions and millions of computers. They all talk to each other. You can link information, you can share information, you can manipulate it, you can create profiles. It's absurd to talk about a data bank. The information is all over the world. It is in many, many different databases, and they can all talk to each other.
I don't think we'll ever see one mega computer storing all the information on everyone everywhere. It will be network that will allow access to information across the board, but there'll be many multiple computer systems and network systems all operating independently and yet can cross-border, can talk to each other to bring up files and communicate across the world.
If that's the case, then everything you say, do, can be tracked and monitored, literally. And as the capability to store that information becomes more and more cheaper and able to be done, then everything you do and say can be tracked.
It's the ease with which information can be moved, databases can be merged, and the ease and the difficulty in controlling who has access to that information that raises very serious concerns, and they're very legitimate concerns.
There's so much money at stake, and there's so much potential to profit from the system that I think we're fooling ourselves if we think that they haven't put a lot of careful thought into exactly how the system's designed. So I think when anonymity isn't a feature of the system, that's not an accident. That's a design goal.
We create a lot of these encroachments on privacy in order to, because they're administratively convenient, they save money, they help us plan, they help society with any one of a number of perfectly legitimate activities. But in the course of doing it, we create tremendous potential to invade people's privacy. With the press of a button, these computers these days can turn out information, coordinate reams and reams of information on people, where they go, what they do, where they've been holidaying, with whom, and all of that.
You know, I mean, if people want to be stamped and identified and dehumanized or traced and matched in this fashion, then what kind of society do we have?
It's much like the bomb. You have it, it gets used. You set up a concentration camp, it gets filled. So I think the technology, in a sense, creates the preconditions for its own use.
The thing that is really needed here is an aware, alert citizenry. I think if the public understood even a quarter of the informational exchanging that is going on without their knowledge and consent, they would be very, very concerned indeed.
Wow, beat me up, Scotty. Sounds more like Star Trek than the evening news. I guess this is all a shock to me, having been in here for so long. The world must have seen it coming, though, right?
I'm afraid not. Even though the technology had been around for years, nobody really paid too much attention to it. And computers that watch where you drive, and satellites up in space that could track your every move. They've even been able to monitor our phone calls for years, but nobody really paid too much attention to it. Almost no one saw it coming.
Almost no one?
Yeah, almost. Those of us who did express our concern were just branded as paranoid, as people who hated technology, people who just weren't ready to be part of a new, united world. And the problem was that the very technology that we were concerned about was actually used to track us down. And believe me, there's no longer anywhere to hide.
It is very hard to hide anything right now because of the high technology. Technology is advancing so rapidly that many times we can't cope with it. Many times we don't understand it. We don't know how the systems work. But the technology provides the surveillance that governments want.
You might once have imagined that a car park would be watched by a physical attendant with a little peaked cap. Can you imagine a situation where many, many thousands of kilometers away, there is somebody in a quite different country, quite different continent, watching the car park where your car happens to be? Now, that's the kind of age that I think we're living in.
You know, you got the stars of the harvest moon going for you. You got nature going for you. You're all by yourself, or so you think. And you look up in the sky and you see something moving through the sky. It's a satellite. Now, I'm not saying it's spying on me, but with the infrared techniques and so I wasn't really alone. And I mean, you know, people have to, on either a dramatic personal discovery basis or not, realize, you know, that this will happen.
The high-tech equipment has certainly advanced tremendously over the years. You're right by saying, is it possible to be able to monitor a person's license plate? The technology is certainly there. And we can even downsize a little bit further. We can probably read the headlines of a newspaper. All a person has to do is watch a movie called Patriot Games, and you can see what type of imagery they used. Thermal imagery they used by identifying an individual. Many times we can use infrared technology because this is a heat-seeking type of equipment. Anything that has been hot, such as a car engine, can be picked up.
One thing which is on the horizon is something that is called intelligent transportation systems. This is a proposal which is currently being developed and will be in place in the near future that will monitor your movements on the highway. Cars will be equipped with a computer device. Tolls, bridges, there will be mechanisms along the highway to track your movements. They will record your license number. They will make sure that your registration is up to date. They will make sure that you are not wanted for any tickets that you might owe. so that all of this will be monitored electronically and they can monitor your activities.
Canadians should be aware that CSE has this database and it contains personal information on Canadians and is held indefinitely. And they should be aware every time they use their phone, be it a cell phone or even what we call landline phones, or a portable, a walkabout phone, every time they use their ATM for a banking transaction, anytime they do anything that is going to be transmitted over the airways, it's there for people to pick up, listen to, and do with whatever they want.
Often when we look at new technologies, we think, wow, this is so new, we have no context to deal with these issues. And yet in the 20s, companies had a common practice that they would raid their employees' homes to make sure their employees weren't stealing from them. And people said, give me a break. That is an invasion of my personal space. That is outside your appropriate role as a business person. And the law eventually caught up and said, no, you can't do that. And I think to a large extent, that's what we're seeing now. That just because we can do something, because technology enables us to do all sorts of things, doesn't mean we should.
We are living in a society now in which surveillance in a score of different forms is becoming a routine of our lives. We cannot get up, leave our homes, and go to our work anymore without being stared at, spied upon, tracked, recorded, monitored, you name it, in 30 or 40 different ways almost every day.
I mean, there's people who make a living out of invading people's privacy, and some of them are called corporate executives, some of them are called deputy ministers of human resources or what have you. That's their job.
So you and I and all the rest of us are going naked before the world, believe me.